My trip to Uganda was in October to November 2017. The entire flight took about 24 hours. I stopped in LA, Amsterdam, Rwanda, and finally to Entebbe, Uganda. I spent 2 weeks in Uganda because I wanted to meet my sponsored child, Joseph. He was 15 years old at that time and in minor seminary. I traveled with 7 other people. 2 of them were Carmelite priests. All but one place we stayed the night at had mosquito netting around the beds. After we woke up on the first night, we drove to the site of where the first Catholic priest landed in Uganda. Father Stephen offered Mass there. It was on the shore of Lake Victoria, and we enjoyed watching the fishermen get ready to go out on the lake. After our second night at a Catholic retreat center, we drove to the shrine of the Ugandan martyrs. This was a very solemn place and humbling. At the church, we watched the end of the Mass for the children, and after Mass, they prayed the rosary in the Luganda language. We walked around the shrine before having to go to Mass ourselves. Uganda is very green. We passed acres of tea plants and even got to see wild monkeys. All of us traveled in a van over bumpy roads with potholes. We spent several nights at the convent of the Little Sisters of St. Francis. Our beds where we stayed were covered in mosquito netting, even though we had to begin taking antibiotics before we left, while we were there and for several weeks after we got home to prevent us from getting malaria. Another sponsor, Ruth Ann, was in our group, and she also got to meet her sponsored child, Susan. We were very fortunate to take a boat ride on Lake Victoria, where the source of the Nile River begins. On a past trip to Cairo, Egypt, I got to see where the end of the Nile River empties.
In the Jinja port, the main port of Uganda, where the ship from Tanzania, Kenya, they used to use this part, but now they change. They take it to Port Belo Luzira, Kampala. But that is the main port in Uganda. Now here we have small ferries. Those who are taking cargo to Tanzania. If you want to go to Tanzania by ferry, you come here. It is 18 hours by ferry.
Oh my gosh.
18 hours from here to Tanzania?
Here's a ferry.
Yeah.
That's almost as long as our flights were.
We drove to Baliba, where we got to visit a leprosy home. We were blessed to meet the residents there. The women sang and danced for us, and the men were just opposite. They just sang. It was beautiful. They were separated into different buildings run by the nuns. The children who lived nearby were following us all around, and I took pictures of them. They enjoyed posing and enjoyed seeing their pictures on my camera. Next to the retreat center where we were staying was a Carmelite monastery in Jinja where young men trained. They invited us to a barbecue where they fixed goat that was just killed that day, mashed potatoes, broccoli, chapati, which is like a fried flour tortilla, banana cake, and lemon cake. It was dark when we arrived, and they had a fire going and some lights. This was all outside. They had African music playing and a little light so we could see.
They don't have a word for speed. What do you call that? Something oven. Toaster oven. Toaster oven. Yeah. Toaster oven.
After dinner, we joined some of the students and danced. Then we tried dancing with a water bottle on our heads, as African people carry things on their heads when they are transporting them.
I can do this.
That's what the song is saying. Or no, maybe fine.
We got back to the retreat house about 10 p.m. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of a lot of monkeys. After breakfast, Father Stephen, Ruth Ann, Sarah, and I took a long walk up to the cathedral where a mass was going on, and down to the monastery and up to the retreat center where we were staying. Along the way, we saw a monkey. Our Sunday Mass was held at Our Lady of Fatima Parish. Father introduced our group to the parish at the beginning of the Mass, and they all applauded. Father Paul did the reading, but he was very emotional, being with the African people once again, and it took a while for him to begin. A newly ordained priest, Father Augustus, had said his first Mass in this parish 3.5 months earlier. The singing and music was fantastic and loud, everyone singing with beautiful voices and African instruments being played. Everyone applauded when the celebrant held up the Eucharist. 5 priests concelebrated this Mass: Father Augustus and Fathers Stephen, Paul, Jan, and Peter. We also visited an American woman's home. Her name was Claire. She started a program in Africa to help mothers and fathers of disabled children learn how to care for them in order to save the children from being abandoned on the street or put in orphanages. Father Stephen wanted us to experience an elegant dinner in Africa. We ate at a restaurant called Gately on the Nile. We ate under a thatched-roofed canopy with lit candles on the table, and it was outside. I ordered a curry beef, rice, and salad. The next day, we drove to the convent where some sisters run a hospital and a school for people with disability. Mother Kevin is their foundress of this order. When we arrived, they gave us a delicious lunch, and after we toured their convent and got to pray at Mother Kevin's grave. We also got to meet the students there who have disabilities, which was the highlight of this visit. They have a shop in which they sell homemade products. I bought 2 baskets that they had made.
I know we don't have a lot.
As we were leaving, a couple of the sisters sang a farewell song to us. After we left, we had a long, bumpy drive through traffic back to Kampala to our hotel. Father Stephen wanted us to experience one night at a luxurious hotel in Uganda. This was called the City Blue Hotel. It had air conditioning, a swimming pool, king-size bed, and wonderful hot showers, things that we have not had at our past places. Nonetheless, I do miss our simple places that we've stayed at. We all ate dinner there, which was an elegant upscale restaurant inside the hotel. I had a chicken Caesar salad, which was delicious, and the next morning we had breakfast all together. We drove to the site of the first Catholic church in Uganda called St. John the Baptist, or more commonly Mapira Church, meaning my father, named after the first missionary priest to land in Uganda, Father Simeon Lordell, who they called Mapira. He is entombed here in the Adoration Chapel. We had our 6th Mass here and a group picture taken afterwards. We drove to see the Anglican Cathedral, but just took pictures. We did not go in. We then drove to the Catholic Cathedral of the Archdiocese of Kampala and had a tour of it. By the time we left, it was 2 p.m., and Sarah Kate, who is in our group and a native Ugandan, had family nearby who invited us to lunch. This was a feast of typical African food. After eating and visiting with her mom, dad, auntie, and cousins, we left for a lengthy drive to our next stop. We stopped at Sister Antonia's school in Kayangiza. We met Sister Antonia and also Sharon, who takes care of the sponsored children and the correspondence between Joseph and I. We are going to stay the night in the Mitjana Center at Midagizo Center, and so we drove another 30 minutes and arrived about 7:30 p.m. The sisters fixed us dinner. The next day, we drove back to Sister Antonia's school, where Mass was going to be prayed. The children were all coming into the building, or the church where the Mass was. 3 priests that were traveling with us, Father Stephen, Father Paul, and Father Peter, celebrated Mass with the pastor of the church. The church was filled with children, and the singing was joyous, accompanied by drums and shakers. At the offertory, everybody brought up donations, and the children even brought up gifts of food and a live chicken. During the consecration, everyone applauded the Eucharist. After Mass, Sister Antonia gave us a tour of the school and then showed us where 8 girls lived and stayed overnight because they lived too far away. The children always greeted us with, "You are most welcome." After we toured their little house grounds, they brought us back into their house and they sang us a song. In each verse of the song, they included one of our names until they got through our whole group. Even though Joseph was away at minor seminary, his family wanted to invite us to their home for a meal. His father Andrew, his mother Margaret, his sister, and some of their grandchildren were there. They kept thanking me for sponsoring Joseph. They prepared the food on smoked banana leaves and in pots. They presented me with gifts of 2 mats and some bowls made by them. And then Andrew showed us around the outside of their home where they grow their food. They had 2 pigs and also showed where they were growing and grinding curry. The next day we attended Mass with the cloistered Carmelite sisters, in which their convent was located behind the Cathedral of the Archdiocese of Mitjana. I was finally able to meet Joseph, and it was on All Souls Day. His school, Sacred Heart Minor Seminary, is in Mubende. When I met him, I gave him a hug, and I gave him gifts that I had brought, including an American flag, some Jelly Bellies, and a photo book that I had made for him. He showed us around his school, including the chapel. We were only there about an hour. We would be spending our next night in Fort Portal. Along the way, we drove into the hills and mountains, passing a lot of tea fields and plantations, and even a family of baboons begging along the side of the road. After leaving the next morning, we stopped at the cathedral in Fort Portal and then went to visit the king's palace. This is the Kingdom of Toro. The king was not there at this time, but we were able to walk around outside his palace. After leaving there, we took a drive up to the magnificent Rwenzori Mountains. The highest peak is over 15,000 feet. The hills are terraced with crops. We were able to stop at a vista point and take pictures. The next stop would be at the Marafiki Safari Lodge, where we will be staying 2 nights. Our safari was through the Queen Elizabeth National Park. We left early the next morning because the animals are more active in the morning. We traveled in a van in which the top opens up high so we could stand up in the van to see the animals. Some of the animals we were able to view were elephants, African cob, warthogs, hippopotamus, and lions. We also took a safari boat ride on the Kazinga Channel. We were able to view many hippos, a Nile crocodile on the shore, water buffalo, an African eagle, and hundreds of birds of every kind. Fishermen were getting their boats ready to go out on Lake Edward to fish. After leaving Queen Elizabeth National Park, we stopped at a marker on the side of the road, which was the equator. At the Marafiki Safari Lodge, we each had our own cabin. Each one has 2 sides made of wood and 2 sides canvas, which can open up onto a deck overlooking the savannah and lake. The bathroom is made of river rock, and the shower has no ceiling, opening up to the outside. The central dining room is also open to the outside. We traveled 250 miles back to Entebbe, passing banana fields and more baboons. It took us 10 hours. That night we stayed at the Mary Mediatrix Retreat Center. The sisters there prepared our meals, and the following night, Father Stephen brought us back to the Entebbe airport. His last words were, "Stay together."